water can actually flow back uphill. How does that happen? Well, water, when it's flowing, is charged with kinetic energy. When there's some resistance to flow that happens, like a check dam that we put in, or just rocks falling in the river, that energy turns into thermal energy. That kinetic energy turns into thermal energy. And this thermal energy actually creates eddy currents that make the water go back uphill. And if we understand this, we can really understand the way creation happens in the universe. Energy is always seeking to go from an organized state to a chaotic state. And life is always trying to get energy to go from a chaotic state to an organized state. So life is negative entropy, and we can understand this better than anything by watching how water flows in a river. This is literally how we irrigate our whole farm. We go to areas like this, where there's a little depression in the water, sediment isn't so bad. We stick hoses like this in the river, and then we channel that hose down all the way to our farm where it comes out, and then we use sprinklers, swales, ponds, and drip irrigation to distribute that water evenly across the farm. When it comes to managing water, our job is always to slow it down. So the more of this water, which right now is carrying nutrients and actually causing erosion, that we can move out of this concentrated spot and move it out onto the ridges where it's drier. That way we're slowing it down and we're spreading it out. And then by using decent soil conservation techniques like terracing, swales, and planting a lot of plants, we're able to sink that water in and store it biologically. It's a really simple technique, but it's very, very powerfully effective. The entropic flow is downhill. The syntropic flow to organization and life is uphill. So the same way we see water flowing uphill in a river, if we know how to look here, we're also seeing water flowing uphill through the trees. And this is what I would want my students more than anything to understand. In Western culture, we're trained to see and recognize the accumulation of flow. So we look at this and we say that's a tree. We're not trained, and we don't look enough at the underlying flows of energy that cause the tree. This tree is the result of sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water accumulating and actually flowing back uphill towards a state of organization. But when you look at trees like this, start training yourself to think of what were the energies that flowed in to make this accumulation possible. So many of the great inventions that we see in nature are actually just mimic of what's happening here. This tree is an incredibly efficient solar panel. It's capturing the sun's rays through photosynthesis, and it's literally turning them into biomass and oxygen. It's also an incredibly effective pump. So it's literally pumping thousands of liters per minute. This is a willow tree, and it has its roots right underneath this river. So it's taking water from this river and it's pumping it uphill. Now, by doing that, it's also regulating the hydrological flows. So all of that water that it's storing up in its leaves are evaporating off in drier periods and keeping it cool and keeping it moist, and meaning that we don't have to wait for water to evaporate from the sea and make it all the way in here. And it's also got an extensive, what you see above in terms of branches, you'll also see something almost identical below it. And what it's doing there is it's allowing for a huge amount of infiltration of water, so that water that's passing down here is actually seeping in, recharging our aquifers. All of this water comes from the flat highlands up above where we have a cloud forest. We have a lot of native oak trees up there because the lake is down here. A lot of evaporation comes off the lake. It actually passes most of it over our heads. We're in the dry forest part here, we're lower down closer to the lake. And then it goes up to the highlands and it settles and it's trapped up there. And there's also a lot of flat land and depression, so there's a lot of space and room for water to infiltrate. And that means that we have a river, several rivers and waterfalls that run all year round. Without the trees and the vegetation, we wouldn't have this water. Healthy water is oxygenated and it has a high mineral content. Why? Because that's what happens in nature. What happens in the global water cycle is this. Water falls as rain and it makes its way back to big collections, lakes and oceans. Then it evaporates back up. Now when it evaporates, it gets completely purified. It's the still water that makes its way up into the clouds, but it has no mineral. It'll fall as rain and it will start to run back. But as it runs back, it will run over the surface of rocks and it will erode those rocks. And it will also accumulate lots and lots of oxygen as it makes it plant. Just look at the bubbles in this water. And then when we use this oxygenated mineral-rich water to drink and to irrigate our crops, we're really getting high-quality water. That is not the same thing that we have access to today. But what we should really all be focusing on is managing our watersheds, planting trees, focusing on infiltrating as much water as possible so that our rivers and springs start to run again, so that everyone has access to this kind of clean running water. And we should also manage our agricultural land so that we're not causing runoff of chemicals into water. Misunderstanding. Everybody typically knows how the global water cycle works: evaporation, precipitation, overland flow, and then discharge into lakes and rivers. What they don't understand is that humans can and do influence this cycle at every stage. And what there's even less awareness about is that we can very, very easily, by learning some basic techniques like terracing, tree planting, swales, smart irrigation systems, different ways of slowing the spreading and sinking in water, humans can become an incredibly positive influence in the global water cycle. It's the advantage we have here. We have this river, but we didn't invent this technique of putting a hose in a river to irrigate our crops. What we maybe brought was more an awareness of soil conservation and terracing, so that we do bring that water onto our land, we conserve it. But for years, the locals have used this exact same system to move water from the river out onto the ridges and to be able to irrigate their crops like corn. Personally, I don't have any problem with it. I think it's a great idea. Take rivers, as long as we're not doing it in massive amounts and dredging them, to take small flows of this river, move it out onto the ridges, irrigate mainly agroforestry systems and food forests, and then sink that water in. It's still going to make it down to the lake, but instead of being down here in a question of minutes, the water we take out of this river and move onto our land, it's going to get down there maybe months later, and it's going to get down there underground, having made contact with thousands of living things on the way down.